Welcome and thank you for coming. Hope you're doing well. We are Group D from Class 106 from IBA06. I'm you, that's Kath, Rick, Ole and Zilin. Today we're going to tell you something about macroeconomic and socio-ethical aspects of urbanization in Indonesia and Cambodia. Urbanization is strongly associated with progress and development. Well-planned urbanization has many socio-ethical and macroeconomic benefits. It also involves social, economic, and environmental changes. Urbanization mainly depends on urban planning. Rapid and unplanned urbanization decreases the ability of national and subnational governments to provide the most basic services. Our content. First, we are going to talk about the repercussions of socio-ethical aspects of urbanization in Indonesia and Cambodia. After that, we're going to talk about the future of Indonesia and Cambodia on macroeconomic level regarding urbanization. First, I'm going to talk about the repercussions of socio-ethical aspects of urbanization in Indonesia. Firstly, I want to talk about urbanization in Indonesia at first. The urban population in Indonesia is growing at a faster rate than the population itself. To be precise, from this point up until 2050, it will grow with 70%. At the same time, the percentage of people living in rural areas in Indonesia will decrease drastically with 20%, as you can see on this graph. This will mean there will be a bigger base of higher income consumers living in a condensed area for companies to target on. This is beneficial because then the companies can focus on one product for the people. It is also beneficial for the people because there will be jobs created, and that means the unemployment rate will go down. When the urbanization started growing, the unemployment rate started decreasing, and it will keep on decreasing the coming years. Governmental spending. The economy of Indonesia is this year is growing with 0.2%. This economic growth will be supported by strong governmental spendings and infrastructure investment. This will give the people a bigger urge to move to the cities because that's where it's all happening. With this urbanization comes some problems like a negative effect on the surrounding environment and outsourcing. These are not the only problems. Jakarta, for instance, has an insufficiently working draining system. This will mean that the heavy rainwater won't be redirected to open waters quickly enough. This will have traffic congestion as its result. This traffic congestion will have CO2 emission as its result, and with this CO2 emission, there will be acid rain and even worse, global warming. The government is addressing these problems with the necessary attention. That's good. Now, population density. Population density is a socio-ethical aspect of urbanization in Indonesia because of all the people moving to one big condensed place, the city. Take for instance Jakarta again. There is 15,000 people living on 1 square kilometer in Jakarta. That's more than Hong Kong. That will mean there will also be more CO2 emission in Hong Kong. How do I know this? The internal journal of Energy, Economics and Policy used the Cobbs and Douglas estimator to calculate the effect of GDP and population density on the CO2 emission in Indonesia. It states that the growth of GDP, a growth of population density, will result into a growth of CO2 emission, and that's where you can see the comparison of the three graphs. Now I will give the word to my colleague Kath. She will tell you something about Cambodia.
As my colleague you've mentioned, now I'm going to talk about the repercussions of socio-ethical aspects on urbanization in Cambodia. And Cambodia is a country that is experiencing rapid growth in population, which is mostly unplanned and unregulated. So this results in some major issues. And I'm going to talk about 4 of them: inefficient urban planning, pollution, neglect of the urban poor, and health problems. I'm first going to start with inefficient urban planning, which is a result of the lack of infrastructure and ineffective implementation in the cities. As an example, I'm going to take the boom in the construction sector, which leads to unbridled construction sites, massive renovations, and actually necessary renovations, because it also affects the quality of life of people, and also it leads to inevitable environmental damage, which leads me to my second point, which is pollution. A problem that Cambodia is severely experiencing right now, because in the cities, mostly because of the rapid urbanization process, there's some massive floodings going on, there's a shrinkage of public green spaces, and also the climate is getting hotter. And on a broader level, I would also say that there are some really large carbon footprints going on right now in Cambodia, which also is detrimental to the life of people in general, in cities and in the rural areas. Which leads me to my third point, which is the neglect of the urban poor, because I would say that because of the rural-urban migration, the poor are moving to the cities, and they are also named slum dwellers because they live at the periphery of capital cities, of the capital city, which is Phnom Penh, and settlements called squatter settlements, which are like one-room wooden houses that have little protection from heat, theft, rain. And I think some percentages that are really important to mention, according to the UNFPA study on Cambodia, there are 45% of households in Cambodia have more than 6 family members. 1/6 of those houses have at least one vulnerable family member, and 1/4 of those houses have at least a member with a chronic disease, which leads me to my last issue, which is sadly health problems. Another issue that Cambodia is severely affected by right now, because most of the citizens are struggling with diseases such as HIV or AIDS and malnutrition. One of the most massive issues right now in the cities is the low fertility rate. But however, there is a good thing that's happening right now in Cambodia, and it's the fact that the infant mortality rate is decreasing rapidly because of the government trying to create communities such as the Urban Poor Development Fund. And while these changes might not seem substantial, the things in Cambodia are improving, especially in the cities. Now I'm going to do a brief comparison of both of these countries, about Cambodia and Indonesia, of course. And while they are really different countries experiencing kind of similar degrees of urbanization, I chose 2 similarities and 2 differences to talk about. And I'm first going to start with the similarities. And I'm going to start with the urban population growth, which is pretty much similar to both of these countries, around 3% annually. And then environmental challenges. Unfortunately, they are facing similar environmental challenges such as air pollution, flooding, let's say vast climate change. The climate is getting hotter. Moving on, I'm going to talk about differences, and first I'm going to talk the most significant differences, which are the CO2 emissions. Indonesia has extremely high, above average CO2 emissions, while Cambodia is doing better on this part. They actually don't really have a high degree of emissions. They are really low, and they have been stagnating for about 5 years now. And also the urban population percentage, it's extremely different. Indonesia has about 54% of their population urbanized right now, while Cambodia is still mostly rural, so about 20% of their population is right now living in the cities. But as I mentioned, the urbanization level degree is moving fastly. And now I'm going to give the word to my colleague Rick.
So for the next part of the presentation, we'll be taking a closer look at the future of Indonesia and Cambodia on macroeconomic level regarding urbanization. Me and Ola will be talking about GDP, infrastructure, unemployment rate, and inflation rate. So Indonesia's GDP has been growing for the past 10 years and will be growing in the future. With the growth in GDP comes a growth in consumers' behavior. People earn more money, people will spend more money. They will buy houses, they will buy bigger houses, flats and apartment complexes have to be built. With this also comes a bit of infrastructural work, which means that sewers have to be built, water and electricity connections have to be laid down. Which brings me to my next part, infrastructure. Infrastructure helps people and businesses decide where to establish and live. And to our surprise, the infrastructure in Indonesia is very weak. Children are not able to reach schools, and people are not able to reach health facilities or other important facilities. Now, the government of Indonesia is very willing to better its infrastructure. The problem is they simply don't have the funds for it. They're in need of around 358 billion dollars. And the government and state-owned companies are only able to get around 70% of this, which means they're still lacking 30%, which is around $110 billion. So regarding the future of Indonesia on infrastructure, there definitely will be facing some issues. The unemployment rate in Indonesia has been going down from about 8% to about 5% in the past 10 years, which means that more people are working, and it has been proven that people would like to live close to work, and most of the work is to be found in the cities, which means that more people will actually move to the city. This brings a lot of urban planning and again more houses and bigger houses. The population will keep growing, and so will the cities, which brings a lot of this has a lot of influence on the urbanization. Inflation rate in Indonesia. The inflation rate in Indonesia has gone down from about 9% in 2009 to 3% this year, which is the lowest for the past 10 years. You might be wondering what is the influence of the inflation in Indonesia on urbanization. Inflation means that prices are rising. Products will get more expensive, and looking at Indonesia's general income, a rise in prices has a lot of influence on the people's purchasing power, which means that people will look for places where products are cheaper. Now, the percentage of people that actually will move to another place is relatively small, but on a population of 270 million people, this will definitely have influence on urbanization. So I will now give the word to my colleague Ole.
As my colleague Rick already said, I will discuss GDP, infrastructure, unemployment rate and inflation rate. I will start off with the GDP. Analyzing the GDP of Cambodia over the past 15 years, it has experienced a major growth, especially around 2008, 2010. It has experienced a very big growth. In the past it had to do with the agriculture, but the last 10 years or last 20 years it is mostly dependent on manufacturing, industry and tourism. This brings a lot of people to the cities for working places. Furthermore, with the infrastructure, the infrastructure is, as Rick already said, very important for other businesses to efficiently trade. Cambodia is really developing at that in that circumstances under the infrastructure. However, it still has a very long way to go, because for example, it doesn't have an expressway at this moment. There's only 1 or 2 railways, so it still has a lot to do. They're working on it. They're working on it very hard with the China Development Bank. In the last 10 years, like $6 billion in it. However, this is not enough for the country to really go on to the next level. Then the unemployment rate. The unemployment rate in Cambodia is quite high. It hasn't been under 10% in the last 20 years. However, at this moment it's drastically changing. You will see in the graph later that it is going downwards, and that's a good sign. And this means that there is more work being offered by the government, by businesses. So this is promising. And as you can see on the next slide, the black line is Cambodia, the blue line is Indonesia. Both the inflation rate of Cambodia and Indonesia are quite, are going all places. In the first year, like 2014, it's quite high. Then later, it's quite low. This is not really good for the country itself because it makes an unstable impression towards investors, which is not promising for the coming years for the countries to whether there are people going to invest in their countries. As I already mentioned, the GDP is growing quite severely in both countries, which is very promising for the next couple of years. It means that the country is really developing and the people are doing better. And the unemployment rate for Indonesia and Cambodia are both going downwards, which is also saying that there is a lot of more working places being offered by the government and by the businesses, which is promising for the next 10 years, we assume.
So for the final part of our presentation, we'll be answering the research question that I will repeat for you. What are macroeconomic and socio-ethical aspects of urbanization in Indonesia and Cambodia? For the socio-ethical part, we have a rapid increase in urban population. Both countries are experiencing a rapid increase of the urban population, which is around 3% in both countries. The government is taking action by implementing policies and creating organizations to aid its citizens, increasing environmental issues. Both countries are experiencing environmental issues such as air pollution, floodings, earthquakes. For the macroeconomic part, GDP growth, both countries experience GDP growth. People earn more money, they will spend more money, which brings buying houses, creating apartments, flats. Decreasing unemployment rate, both countries have a decreasing unemployment rate, which means that more people are working. Work is to be found in the cities mostly, which ends up in cities growing and urban planning to be done. Improvement in infrastructure, both countries are really trying to improve their infrastructure. They're both still really developing on this part. So yeah.
Okay.
Thank you for your attention. This is our group presentation. If you have any questions, we're glad to answer you.